We have a very significant update today, including some updates on Jack Eichel, Rasmus Ristolainen, and Sam Reinhart in Buffalo. We also have some updates on the Montreal Canadiens and some other offseason moves they might be exploring. We also have word that the New York Islanders might be trying to make a side deal with the Islanders to avoid a certain player being plucked off the expansion list. And we have other updates as well, including Logan Brown in Ottawa, PK Subban, and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a ton of information to go over here today. I want to kick things off with the word that PK Subban could find himself on the move here yet again. The New Jersey Devils are apparently open to trading the defenseman who's making $9 million, but he's down to 1 year left on that contract. The salary itself is significantly less than the cap hit, and of course they can retain up to 50%. So would teams looking for right shot defensemen be willing to take PK Subban on at maybe a $4.5 million cap hit? That's certainly a possibility, and no guarantees, of course, that it gets done, but the Devils are apparently having exploratory conversations around the league, trying to see if they can find some movement there. Of course, they may not have a choice but to wait, and maybe he becomes a player traded at the NHL trade deadline. That is a real possibility as well, but I do think the odds of him getting moved are much greater now, given the cap hit that comes with them, even at 50%. That's still a lot for teams to take on at the deadline, for example. But, it's a big surprise here that PK Subban's play has declined. He's nowhere near being the $9 million defenseman he was when he first signed that contract back with Montreal a number of years ago. But he can still be an effective player, and given the right role and maybe a lower in the lineup with the right team, I think he could be a good pickup. There has been rumored to be a variety of teams looking for, that type of player. So we'll see if anything happens here, what could go down. I wouldn't suspect it happens immediately after the roster freeze, because there's certainly a lot of other names that are likely going to get moved ahead of them. But maybe when we get closer to the NHL draft on the weekend, that is a possibility, or shortly thereafter, depending on what teams do. But he may not be like the prime target for some teams, but he could be a fallback option for teams that don't get other players that they might have had kind of ranked a little bit higher on their wish list, so to speak. There was rumors today about the Seattle Kraken signing Phillip Danault of the Montreal Canadiens. There's a lot of rumors going around that he's signed somewhere between 6 and 8 years at $5.8 million. Now, we do have word from TVA Sports reporter Renaud Lavoie saying that those are false rumors, that he's checked around, even talked to Danault's agent, and that was not indeed the case. But there are people out there that are convinced that Danault will be the player selected by the Seattle Kraken from Montreal, and they'll be signing him to a long-term contract, because right now they have the exclusivity window to talk to UFAs and RFAs that were unprotected by their NHL squads right now to see if they can sign them to a contract, and that could be their selections. But we also have many NHL insiders still talking plenty about the Carey Price decision on Seattle, so I really don't see that being the case. If it was really that well known that Danault was going to be signing with Seattle, that's certainly would be taking away all the Carey Price speculation. Now, could Danault eventually sign with Seattle afterwards? It's a possibility, but as I talked about Danault in yesterday's video, there's really no reason to believe right now, based on what we're hearing at least, that they are a team that's on his radar. So we'll have to see. There's going to be all kinds of players that they're talking to, but right now the rumors out there about Danault going to Seattle appear to be false, but we'll have to watch that situation and see if there's anything else that we can learn that might validate them in any shape or form. But when it comes to Carey Price, so there was again talked about on Insider Trading tonight on TSN, Pierre LeBrun and Darren Dreger talking about how there's still a real sense that the Kraken are really seriously considering making this move, and it really does appear to be like a game of chicken calling each other's bluff here. So they don't see Montreal making a side deal with Seattle to not take Carey Price. Either you take him or you don't. It appears to be the way it's positioned right now. Of course, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern is when the lists are due to be submitted by Seattle to the league so they can make their selections official. So this whole saga will be over here soon enough. This time tomorrow night as I record this video, the expansion draft will be starting to air on TV, and we'll find out exactly who is being selected. But Carey Price is scheduled to be in New York, I believe, on Thursday for doctor's appointments regarding his hip and knee, and then a lot of that information won't be really too much available until afterwards. So we'll see how things go and what the decision on Price is. But right now, it looks like Danault going to Seattle is not going to circumvent that from happening. Now, staying with Montreal, there's also word from Dave Pagnotta of thefourthperiod.com that the Habs are indeed looking for another forward. Now, of course, I talked about this yesterday as well. There was some speculation from Andy Strickland that Mike Hoffman would be a guy that they would want to talk to as a UFA, that they do want to add another scoring winger to their group. I had even mentioned after Montreal lost to Tampa that I do feel like adding one more scoring forward would be a good help to them. It just seems like they kind of, had a tough time against the Lightning, and having one more layer, I guess, of scoring could potentially go a long way to helping them be, a higher level elite team here. Now, of course, that was before we knew a lot of the things that were possibly changing with the Habs going into next year, and it could be a whole different scenario if we don't have a Carey Price or a Shea Weber, or what else happens here, Jonathan Drouin, all kinds of uncertainty and speculation about what this team is even going to look like now for next year. But a player that it's reported that they're interested in talking about trading with would be New York Islanders forward Anthony Beauvillier. Now, a couple of reasons behind this. Of course, he's a younger forward, needs a new contract, wouldn't be crazy expensive to sign or to make a trade with. I mean, it is obviously, a decent price tag. I'm sure would come from Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders, but it's not like it's a crazy expensive deal. So that means for starters, there's that. Secondly, if they don't have players like Jonathan Drouin and Phillip Danault in Montreal, they will not have any players on the roster that are, French first language. And that's something that's very important to the Habs as an organization, to have a French-speaking coach and at least some French-speaking players. Obviously, that's their first language in Quebec. It's very important to the organization for some of the players, the coaching staff, etc., to be able to handle the local fans and media in that language. And it would be a big deal for them to not have a French-speaking player on the team. Doesn't absolutely have to be a guy like Beauvillier, but it is something that they're rumored to be interested in doing, along with that player being a scoring type of forward. So we know the Islanders are a team that's still looking to make some moves themselves. Of course, right now they have their own situation with the expansion draft. They're waiting to see how that plays out. They're, potentially involved with the Tarasenko deal. So they might be in a situation where they might need to free up some cap space too. So that could possibly work in Montreal's favor. If they want to free up even more space by moving Beauvillier to make a bigger splash, then it's something that they might be able to do. There's no real word on exactly what kind of the return package would be. I'm not sure if they're looking for more of a futures-based prospect. I'm not sure if the Islanders would be looking for more of a futures package. The Habs do have some very interesting young players, though, that could go and get a fresh start with the Islanders. Like a guy like Ryan Poehling, for example, kind of comes to mind. I don't know if that's something that they'd have interest in. But, of course, they have lots of draft currency as well, so it could even be a couple of picks. I'm just speculating what the return would be, because there's no real hard, firm answer right now on what Lou and the Islanders would be looking for if they even move the players. No guarantee they even want to trade Beauvillier, just that the Habs have interest. So we'll see. There's probably other players they're looking at, but they're not going to get too far ahead of themselves here, because they have to see how the expansion draft plays out and what this roster is going to look like afterwards, which is going to make a big difference on any other decisions that they make here going forward. Now, staying with the New York Islanders as well, of course, a couple of big names they have on their unprotected list include forwards Jordan Eberle and Josh Bailey. Now, I think Josh Bailey, most people would agree, is the more attractive forward here to take. I think he's been a lot more consistent, a lot more productive. He's been a heart and soul kind of player for the Islanders for a really long time, and it's kind of surprising that they left him unprotected and protected guys like Clutterbuck and Matt Martin. As much as those guys I know have a lot of value, and like them along with Cizikas, usually the starting lineup for their every game, and they play a big role as a physical line, a guy that can play good defense, but Bailey's pretty important too, so I found it surprising that he was exposed, and it makes me think that the main reason for that is they just want to kind of dangle another carrot for Seattle to take a bigger contract off their books, to have more cap flexibility, to go after a bigger fish. That's kind of what my thinking is here. Of course, no guarantees that I'm on the right path, but that's what I think they're trying to do. Now, of course, there is word, though, that the Islanders are trying to convince the Kraken to take Jordan Eberle and not Bailey, and that Lou might be working with Ron Francis to try to work out a side deal to make that happen. Now, I will be a little bit surprised if they do make a side deal, because the reports have been, what's been requested have been absolutely astronomical. We're looking for multiple draft picks, sometimes even a higher level prospect included. Like there was reports for some players, like there was going to be like a first and a third round pick for some players on other teams. So I can't imagine Lou paying that much of a price to keep Bailey. So we'll see what they end up doing here. If the price tag is decent enough, they might, budge and get that deal done to keep Josh Bailey. But it is possible that he could be the target here. I mean, based on what's available on the Islanders unprotected list, to me, if I'm doing the Seattle Kraken job here in Ron Francis, I'm taking Josh Bailey. That's a good player that can really be a good heart and soul kind of player, consistent guy. He's been good in the playoffs. He's just an all-around good player, and I'd be happy to take him. So I'd have to be given a nice, sweet incentive to pass and take a guy like Jordan Eberle. But Lamoriello apparently is working on that behind the scenes. Now, there is also word out of Ottawa that prospect Logan Brown might be finally getting a trade and getting a fresh start in a new city, and that very well could be the Seattle Kraken. No guarantees that happens, but there has been words circulating around through Ottawa that he's on his way out of town, leaving the organization. Now, of course, he was a first-round pick back in 2016. He's yet to really get any kind of a regular role. He's been injured a lot. He's been a guy has not anywhere come close to living up to his potential. So at this point, the Senators are so well stocked with prospects, I'm starting to think they're getting to the point where, not that they don't care, because he was a really good looking player when they drafted him. They even moved up in the draft to take him. I mean, he's a 6'6", offensively gifted forward who had the potential at that point to be a top 6, maybe even a top 1 center on your team. I mean, he's not lived up to that hype. He's had some good times in the American Hockey League, been productive. Largely, the biggest issue with Logan Brown is staying healthy, but obviously to a degree, adapting to the NHL level when he's been there has been a little bit of an issue as well, especially when it comes to pace. He just looked a little bit out of place at the end of the year. He finally got a chance, and just like the pace was not there. And I really wonder at this point, not only is he going to be an NHL star, but is he even going to be an NHL player? I honestly do wonder. Now, given a change of scenery with some new coaches, another opportunity, maybe he makes the most of it and becomes a little bit of a late bloomer. We'll have to wait and see. But there was word circulating earlier that the Senators might be making a deal with the Kraken, that they might be getting a player from them from the expansion draft and trading Logan Brown to Seattle for the unnamed player. I'm not really sure who that would be. We know that the Senators are primarily looking for a top 4 right shot defenseman. Ideally, a partner for Thomas Chabot would be preferable, who can handle maybe not the minutes that Chabot runs, but somewhere close, 20 plus minutes a night, and play that side for him would be the ideal addition to the Sens lineup. And if they can find for the right price another top 6 center as well to take the pressure off of a Shane Pinto, who only had a handful of NHL games at the end of the season, so he can either play maybe a lower in the lineup or possibly even start in the AHL, that would be preferable as well. So we'll have to see what the Senators do, but right now there is word circulating. We'll see if there's any truth to it, that Logan Brown could be on his way to Seattle for somebody that they're taking in the expansion draft with Ottawa in mind. So another move to possibly find out on Wednesday night or shortly thereafter. Now, staying with the Kraken, there's lots of free agents that they've apparently been talking to, and they have a high level of interest in guys like Dougie Hamilton and Gabriel Landeskog. Now, there's no guarantee they come to terms with either or both of them, but there's a real possibility that they could end up being the players selected from those franchises. I mean, right now they have an exclusive window, and we know that Gabe Landeskog was, at this point, really not going well with the Avalanche when it comes to negotiations. He seems to be hurt and kind of getting emotional to the point that a deal isn't done. And when those types of things happen, sometimes you really get more interested in what else is out there. And I do think that at this point, it might seem to be more likely that he leaves Colorado than he ends up re-signing. But I do think that the Avalanche will take another run at this, assuming that he doesn't go to Seattle and that they lose a different player here instead. It's believed that there could be, 6-7 year terms out there for him in the neighborhood of close to $60 million. So $60 million is a lot of dough. I don't see the Avalanche going anywhere near that. I think they want him closer to that $7 million mark if possible, maybe even a little bit less. There was word before that they were offering in the neighborhood of about 5.5 to 6, and that they were not crazy about going to a 7 or 8 year term. They wanted to go a shorter term. Now, he's 28, going to be 29. I think the Avalanche would prefer maybe like a 5-year deal, and it seems like he wanted the longer term, like the max deal, to kind of get him closer to the end of his career. I mean, maybe he plays a little bit after that contract's expired, maybe he doesn't, but it's still a situation where he kind of wanted to make himself an ad for life, so to speak, or pretty close to it at least. So I don't know. Things are getting emotional there, and there are a couple of players that could very well be on Seattle's radar that they are very interested in. And if they reach to terms here during this exclusive window, then they could pluck a couple of prominent players here that might not actually end up hitting free agency after all. Now, there's also a lot of word about Adam Larson at Edmonton, and that there's a good chance now that he might in fact actually leave the organization. I know back even before the playoffs were over, we had heard that Larson was really close to signing a new deal with the Oilers, but things got held up, things didn't get completed, and now they're actually in jeopardy of possibly falling apart. It's at the point now that Larson wants to see what else is out there. Now, apparently he's also a team that have talked to the Kraken. No guarantee that he signs there either, but still another player that can interview with them on this exclusive window, and you just never know. But apparently another team that's been very interested in Adam Larson is the Vancouver Canucks. Now, it's hard to say what they do when it comes to Adam Larson. It might be more of a situation that if they do find a trade for Nate Schmidt, they might be more likely to sign him. But the Vancouver Canucks are extremely tight on cap space. They've also been linked to a guy like Jaden Schwartz, but again, tough to do, right? I mean, they don't have a lot of opportunity there. They got to get Pettersson and Hughes signed to really know what they have for cap space while trying to shed some of the dead weight, which is going to be tough to do, with Beagle, Roussel, and, Virtanen and all those contracts and Eriksson that they don't really want to have anymore. So we'll have to see what Jim Benning does, but even though they're linked to some of these other players, it's going to be tough to do because of the limited amount of salary cap opportunity that they have to work with here. But if Adam Larson, regardless if he goes to Vancouver or elsewhere, it is believed that if he does leave Edmonton, that's just going to increase the likelihood that Tyson Barrie works out a deal to stay. It's believed that the contracts there would be fairly similar. Probably Barrie looking to sign for multiple years. I'm not sure how many exactly, but under $5 million. And he really liked to fit in Edmonton and would be willing to take that kind of contract if the Oilers can make it work. So Adam Larson leaving might open a door for a Tyson Barrie return. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on the Buffalo Sabres and all three of their players that are likely going to get moved here sooner than later. Now, according to multiple reports, it's believed that Rasmus Ristolainen is going to be the first player traded. He is the most likely domino to fall first, and he very well could be traded as early as Thursday when the roster freeze is lifted. Apparently, there's been significant interest, really for an extended period of time, but the Sabres were always a little bit reluctant to make the move. Now they're at a point where they're a lot more closer to being ready to make to pull the trigger here and get the deal done. It's believed the asking price for Ristolainen is likely a second-round pick and a pretty decent prospect. Right now, there's multiple teams from around the league showing interest, but I know a couple of Canadian teams that are kind of kicking tires on the idea. One is the Winnipeg Jets. They really could use a guy like Ristolainen. He's been linked there before, as well as early as even last year when they were starting to go through a lot of changes on their blue line. Like their blue line's been questionable for a little while now, and the whole time Ristolainen's been a player that's been linked there. Even the Montreal Canadiens apparently are showing interest as well due to the Shea Weber uncertainty. If he ends out all next year, well, Ristolainen could be a good fit. Now, he's down to 1 year in his contract. They would not necessarily have to immediately re-sign him. They could take the wait-and-see approach, see if the fit's good for them, see if it's good for the player, get a better idea on Weber, maybe extend him at a later date. Doesn't mean that they'd have to rush into getting a contract done. I mean, they could choose to do that, but they certainly do not have to, which makes things a little bit more flexible. And there's, like I said, they're not the only teams out there. There's several others interested in the right shot defenseman. Even the Philadelphia Flyers are mentioned as well. Even though they got Ryan Ellis a few days ago here in a trade, it's believed that they're probably going to lose another defenseman, possibly a Robert Hogg, in the expansion draft. Now, there's talk that there could be a deal go down with the Flyers where they trade Voracek to Seattle for Tarasenko, assuming the Kraken select Tarasenko in the expansion draft, and that a draft pick or more could be attached to Voracek, but that a defenseman like Hagg could be the player selected in expansion. So they could lose a D, and they might need to be going to the market to try to find another defenseman to replace him, and that Ristolainen's a player that they do have interest in now. So we'll have to see if that's a fit. I mean, obviously, the Flyers are looking for multiple pieces there. So they're, like I said, again, not the only teams. There's lots of interest out there. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But another player, obviously, to watch is Sam Reinhart. I think as we get closer to the NHL draft, there is a more likelihood that a deal gets done. But out of all three players, I think Reinhart is the only player who has a decent chance to possibly stay with the Sabres. If he does stay, I don't expect it to be long term. I would suspect that it's a case where he probably would end up going to arbitration, do a 1-year deal, and likely be traded at the NHL trade deadline because he's not far from being a UFA status. That is a possibility here as well. if they don't find the right deal. But a couple of teams to watch out for when it comes to Reinhart are the Canucks and the Kings, and it could be their first round pick in play here. Now, as I said with Vancouver, they're tight on space, so they'd have to find a way to move some money, which is what Jim Benning's been talking about lately, which is going to be the case for him to do much of anything this offseason. He has to move some money around, but obviously the Kings and the Canucks are picking at 8-9 in the draft, and that's going to be the main picks outside of possibly a top 5 pick that could end up getting traded. The LA Kings with the 8th overall pick, and the Kings and the Canucks and the Vancouver Canucks with that 9th overall pick could be in play for Reinhart. Now, I don't think it's going to take just that pick. I think they're going to have to add something to it. We've seen reports as well that the Vancouver Canucks have shown interest, but right now they're open to trading the pick, but that's all the offer has been, and it's believed they're going to have to add a decent young player to that pick to get the deal done. Now, the price could change as we get closer to the draft. Once we actually hit the draft floor and a deal hasn't been reached, maybe the price changes and they just take the first round pick, but it's believed that a younger, decent NHL young player is going to have to be added to that mix. I don't know if they'd be willing to throw in a guy like a Podkolzin or a Höglander. Maybe it's a lower level prospect like a Jet Wu. If Cole Lynn doesn't go in the expansion draft, maybe he could be the guy. I'm not sure who that young player would need to be from Vancouver. I would think some higher level prospects like a Podkolzin, maybe even a Höglander, even though he's not really a prospect anymore, but a good young player. I would think they wouldn't be available by the Canucks, but I guess you never know. Sam Reinhart is a player that would be like a homecoming for him to go to the Canucks, and that they've been very interested in, so we'll have to see. But those two teams with their first round picks are certainly teams that are in play here, especially if the reports are true that the Kings are not really, pushing it with Jack Eichel any longer. They appear to be out of that race, which means they likely could circle back to a player like Reinhart. Now, on to Eichel, though. We do have reports from Elliot Friedman in the latest 31 Thoughts podcast, and a few others as well, confirming these reports that it looks as though it's down to a 2-horse race with the Wild and the Rangers when it comes to the Jack Eichel sweepstakes. Teams like the Flames, the Kings, and the Ducks all appear to be out right now, and it doesn't mean they won't jump back in. All it takes is one phone call, one change of heart, and boom, we get ourselves a potential deal here back in the mix, right? That's all it takes. But as of right now, when it comes to LA, they are unwilling to include Byfield. So obviously that's not something that Buffalo appears to be budging on. So no Byfield, no deal. When it comes to the Anaheim Ducks, they really want Trevor Zegras. They really want that number 3 pick. If those are not in the mix, not in the package, no deal for you. So the Anaheim Ducks, if they come back and are willing to change their mind and put that number 3 overall pick in either Zegras or Drysdale in there with some other pieces, you never know. Maybe the Anaheim Ducks do get back in the mix and maybe do end up winning these sweepstakes. Right now, it's believed that they're all on the outside looking in, and it's down to basically the Minnesota Wild and the New York Rangers, who have been the main 2 teams all along that have had the best opportunity here. I mean, I know prospect pool-wise, the Kings are right there with them, but I've been saying for a long time that those 2 are the main teams that have been in the mix here. So when it comes to the Minnesota Wild, let's believe they would throw in their first-round pick this year. They would be willing to possibly include Matthew Dumba, as well as at least one of their top 2 prospects with Rossi and Matthew Boldy. If they throw in both of them, I think it's game over. The Minnesota Wild win. If you throw Boldy, Rossi, a first, and Dumba, that's one heck of a package. Maybe even another roster player, maybe a lower level roster player or a second round pick, or and one extra asset doesn't have to be as significant in there. That is a darn good package, and I don't think the Sabres are going to get any better. But it's believed that they would prefer not to include Rossi and Boldy, but one of them, along with Dumba, along with a first, and then maybe a player off the roster. I wouldn't be shocked if it was Kevin Fiala instead of both of those prospects. You throw in Fiala, Rossi, a first, and Dumba, or maybe it's not. In that case, maybe Dumba's not. Maybe it's Fiala instead. Either way, combination of all that, probably at least 4 of those pieces could get a deal done. When it comes to the Rangers, you're looking at probably players like roster players like Buchnevich and Georgiev being the most intriguing. You've got obviously some younger players like Kravtsov could be in the mix. Braden Schneider's another name. Maybe a Zach Jones, of course, their first round pick. Some combination of that would be what we're likely looking at. It's believed that they would not want to include Lafreniere or Kakko, but they have plenty of other pieces here to work around that. So, Keandre Miller is another player that they don't want to include. And Nils Lundqvist, I've heard some say that they might be okay with it, and others saying they wouldn't be. So I'm not sure. But either way, they got a lot of prospects there to put together 2 or 3 decent prospects with a couple of roster players and a first-round pick. I think the Rangers can definitely get this deal done. And the main way the Wild can outbid them would be to include Rossi and Boldy both. I'm not sure Bill Guerin's going to want to do that, but that's kind of where things are at. So right now, it looks like it could be a 2-horse race for the Jack Eichel sweepstakes, and it might still take a little while longer, though. It's hard to say. I mean, if it gets done before the draft, then we have some higher first-round picks that could be included. But if not, then we're looking at 2022 first-round picks, which, for Buffalo's sake, might actually be better anyway, because it is a deeper draft. So we'll have to see, because there are some out there that think that an Eichel trade still might take a couple of weeks, but you just never know. As I said, all it takes is one phone call to accelerate things, and things can get going a lot faster, and maybe it happens before the first round of the NHL draft coming up this Friday night. So we'll have to see. So let me know your thoughts, something discussed down below. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.